but I honestly had to stop multiple times because I felt sick to my stomach. Hello everyone, I've got a slightly different topic for you today. This is the first episode of series that I'll be sharing here and there, and I'm calling Dark History of Medicine. Now, it's a simple truth that there aren't just good people in the world. Evil, sadistic people are unfortunately found in every profession, and doctors are no exception. I'm a big fan of military history, and while most people are very familiar with the atrocities committed at Auschwitz during World War II, the horrors of Japan's Unit 731 are much less known. Of course, as a Korean, we know about it because it happened to us, but even for Koreans, it's not as widely known as Auschwitz. The Netflix show Gyeongseong Creature is set in this time period, but honestly, I think it treats this very serious issue a bit too lightly. But I mean, it's a drama, so I understand. So today, I want to take you deep into medical perspective of what actually happened at Japan's Unit 731. There's a group in Japan called the Research Society on War and Medicine. It's a group of courageous Japanese doctors who get together to publish studies and articles every couple of years. One of the books they compiled is called Everyone Knows, but No One Knows Unit 731. It's written like a research paper. Case 1, they did this and this. Case 2, they did this and this. There were so many people responsible for Unit 731, but the one you absolutely have to know is the head of the unit, the mastermind behind all these experiments, Shiro Ishii. Shiro Ishii came from privileged background. He was from noble family that owned land, and they even own a brewery. He was born after Meiji Restoration, a time when Japan was becoming very nationalistic and militaristic. After they won Russo-Japanese War in 1905, the whole country was riding a wave of national pride. Ishii grew up in this environment, and it definitely had a huge impact on him. He must have felt a great sense of duty to do something for Japan. He went on to Kyoto Imperial University's medical school and was an incredibly smart student. But he was not a popular guy. His classmates apparently hated him. However, his superiors absolutely adored him. He was a master at sucking up to his superior, which, along with his wealthy background, earned him a privilege of marrying the daughter of Araki, the university president at the time. His path to success was perfectly set. In 1922, if you wanted to be a big shot in Japan, where would you go? The army, right? So he joined the army as a military doctor. His academic focus was on bacteriology, microbiology, and pathology. This doesn't sound good already, right? At one point, there was a huge encephalitis outbreak on Shikoku Island. The mortality rate was over 60%. He saw this as his chance to make a name for himself. So he went there and successfully isolated the virus. This was a huge scientific achievement, and he also did research on treating gonorrhea, which was very difficult to cure at that time because penicillin hadn't been commercialized yet. He found that fever could help treat it, so he even experimented with using malaria to induce fever in patients. It sounds crazy now, but back then, his idea were considered groundbreaking. Up to this point, he was just a talented, if slightly eccentric, medical pioneer. But then he saw World War I and was fascinated by chemical weapons, specifically poison gas. This is where his true nature started to emerge. At the time, Japan's chemical weapons technology was far behind Germans or other European powers. So Ishii went to the Japanese government and argued that they need to develop biological weapons. The government said, okay, you got a talent, so you can do it. They gave him massive financial support. He was given diplomatic status to travel to the United States, England, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Finland, Germany, Hungary, Italy, Poland, and Soviet Union. And it's interesting a bit of story, but since Japan was a victorious ally in World War I, they were able to get inside research lab in places like England. They didn't show him everything, but he saw enough to bring back a huge amount of knowledge. This is when Japan's bacteriological research took a huge leap forward. His success led to a promotion to major in 1931, and he was appointed head of immunology department at Tokyo Army Hospital. His main research focus was now on the plague and anthrax, two very effective bioweapons. Regardless of his horrific ethic, Ishii was a genuinely brilliant scientist. To this day, anthrax is a primary choice for biological warfare. But like all researchers, he hit a wall. He needed to test on the living subject. He demanded that the government should allow him to perform human experiments. The government was hesitant, asking like, who are you going to experiment on? Like our own Japanese people? But Ishii was very persistent. Then, in 1931, Japan invaded and gained control of a part of China. Ishii went to the government with a proposal. Send me to China and I'll use Chinese people for this experiment. The Japanese government agreed immediately because in their view, Japanese-born citizens were first-class citizens while people from their colony were second-class citizens. It's a long story, but we will skip the details for now. So he went to China, and that's when he created what was officially called Epidemic Prevention Department, but what we know as Unit 731. With the full support of Japanese government, he built a massive facility in Beiheng, about 60 miles from Harbin. He launched what he called Project Togo, named after Admiral Togo, a legendary Japanese naval commander who defeated Russia in 1905. The implication was very clear. We will create a superior biological weapon just like Admiral Togo created a superior navy. In 1932, the human experiment began. There was nothing stopping him now. The facility was enormous and security was airtight. No one could get in. But the local Chinese resident quickly realized that something was wrong. People would go in, but nobody ever came out, and they could always hear screams. When people tried to run away, Japanese soldiers stopped them, and even local residents were forced to become a test subject, along with the Soviet POWs and Korean living in China, and even Japanese criminals if needed. I want to emphasize something here. Many of documents from Unit 731 were destroyed and a lot of evidence was lost. When Japan surrendered after atomic bombs, they had time to destroy a lot of proof. Most importantly, all the test subjects died. All of them. There were no survivors to bear witness. However, the Research Society on War and Medicine worked tirelessly. They tracked down soldiers who had served in the unit and convinced them to testify, promising them they would not be prosecuted. Thanks to their effort, we now have a concrete, detailed records. One such person was Yoshino Shinozuka, a soldier who worked in the unit. He was tasked with the cultivating bacteria. He said he was told that his work would be a huge contribution to Japan's victory. He knew nothing about bacteria or how to cultivate them, so he was simply trained to do whatever his boss was telling him to do. What they did was terrifying. They would grow massive quantity of plague, anthrax, and E. coli. But to test their effectiveness as a weapon, they would drop this bacteria on nearby Chinese village without any warning, of course. The goal was to see how fast it would spread and how it would infect people. They were literally testing the efficacy of their bioweapon on living people. When they brought people to the lab, they were stripped naked and their heads were shaved. They looked so similar that the soldiers started to refer to them as maruta, the Japanese word for wooden logs. They were not seen as human beings. This courageous Japanese doctor and researcher named Shiro Karita uncovered something else horrific. He discovered that Shiro Ishii had a huge interest in frostbite. This was strange because Japan's main battleground in World War II were in warm, tropical areas like Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. The only cold place was where the lab was located in China. We don't know why Ishii focused on this, but it's worth noting that the Nazis were also doing extensive research on frostbite at the time. It seems like the Axis power had a shared interest in topic. The main person in charge of this research was Hisato Yoshimura. After the war, he claimed that he only conducted experiments at 0 degrees Celsius and that he wasn't that cruel. But a record of a lecture he gave in 1941 reveals the truth. He said he conducted his research at minus 20 degrees Celsius. And here's how it worked. He would expose people's hands to the cold until they froze solid. To confirm that their hands were completely frozen, he would hit them with a wooden plank. If the person didn't feel anything and their hand shattered like a piece of glass, he knew it was a frozen solid. Then he would begin the next phase of experiment. He found that in the fridge temperature, people's sensation disappeared quickly. After they were stripped naked for testing, their limbs and face would harden. He observed that the blood vessel would contract, then become paralyzed, and that as the skin temperature dropped below freezing, some blood vessel would burst, causing a temporary temperature spike before freezing again. He talked about this finding in 1941, and exactly 1 year later, he published treatment protocol stating that the best way to treat frostbite was not with the hot water, lukewarm water at 37 degrees Celsius. So for a whole year, he was experimenting on people, changing the temperature to see what would happen. He was able to get a fast result because he was using human subject. What is truly infuriating is that some of the test subjects for the frostbite experiment were pregnant women and infants. And even a person survived one experiment, they were guaranteed to die. They were either used for another experiment or simply disposed of. I mentioned earlier that Unit 731's main goal was a germ warfare, so they conducted an in-depth research on bacteria as well. They experiment with how different bacteria affect the body when injected into the bloodstream or through the skin, and how they affect different organs. The researchers at Unit 731 later claimed they never did this thing, but the record proved otherwise. Case 1, injection time, symptom, date of death. And they had to keep this data in order to make a weapon. Their research was about finding the most effective way to kill people. But not all bacteria were used for weapons. The syphilis research had a different purpose. The Japanese army in World War II used a very old-fashioned method of warfare, while modern armies rely on supply lines for food and ammunition. The Japanese army was trained to live off of land by pillaging and looting. During this process, they inevitably did something awful. They essayed local women. They also took comfort women with them. The result was that syphilis started to spread through the army. They needed a way to treat it. But to research a cure, they needed infected test subjects. And it was difficult to find already infected people. So they took a healthy individual and purposely inject them with syphilis. First, they tried injecting the bacteria, but it didn't always work because it wasn't a natural infection process. So they brought in an infected Japanese soldier and forced them to assay the test subject to transmit the disease. And if the victims become pregnant, they would research the effect on fetus, including vertical transmission of the disease. And this research helped? Not at all. There was no penicillin to treat it. By the way, penicillin was already in use during World War II, but the problem was mass production. It wasn't easy back then, to the point that they even tried to reuse penicillin from the concentrated urine from the patient. But the Unit 731's atrocities didn't stop there. To test the effect of weapon, they shot people with guns, they stabbed them with knives, they threw a grenade at them. They even performed the absurd experiment like cutting off the person's right arm and reattaching to their left side. They also conducted horrific experiment on the concept of maternal love, placing mothers and their infants in a hot room and timing how long it would take for mother to step on her own child to escape the heat. There were so many more horrifying records, but I honestly had to stop multiple times reading them because I felt sick to my stomach. All in all, at least 3,000 people were killed in this experiment in the lab, and more than 200,000 people in small villages from biobacteria testing. But when Japan lost the war, what happened to the war criminal? What happened to Hisato Yoshimura, the Frostbite researcher? After the war, he became the dean of the medical school at Kyoto University. In 1978, he was awarded a Japanese Order of Merit, and he lived a long and comfortable life. The head of the unit, Shiro Ishii, also died a respectful figure in the Japanese medical community. The general consensus is that they made a deal with the United States. Communication from American associates at the time still exists, and reading them just made me realize justice isn't always served. Even though this experiment might give a huge contribution to the medical history, but these people should not have been allowed to die in peace. How was today's video? From now on, I'll be sharing interesting medical histories here and there too. It's not fun to only talk about the health, right? So if you like this video, please hit the like and subscribe, and remember, health is wealth, so invest in yourself. This is Dr. Sean making health easy for you. See you next time.